This is episode number 375 of WP Watercooler, WordPress, Democratizing Publishing, and Democracy. Sponsored by our fine friends over at ServerPress, Maker's Desktop Server. They make local WordPress development easy. Check them out over at serverpress.com.
Did you say episode 375?
375.
Wow, we're getting up there.
We are.
When's our midlife crisis? Can we get a car?
I've already gone through it.
I really thought you were going to say serverpress.js too, just to like serverpress.js. It's cool. There's all of it.
Oh, man. How are all of you this morning?
Ready? I'm like chomping at the bit for this conversation.
Oh, goodness.
So I'm going to just segue into it. I'm going to
Go for it, Say. Go for it, Say.
Do it.
Jumping in.
Jump off.
So for the past couple of weeks, there's been some things going on in the world, particularly in the US. I don't know if anyone's paid attention to this. Yeah, no. It's kind of like low profile, so you may not have noticed. But the whole like democracy of the United States of America has been a little up in the air for a couple weeks. And you know, we're not really a political. We try not to take political stances on the show. We try to respect the spectrum of political belief, especially amongst the WordPress community. Said that with a straight face.
That was Cosper.
No, but really, you know, people, you know, have different views on economic policy and whatevs. But given I've just been thinking a lot about democracy. No reason. And, you know, it occurred to me that we, so much as that the United States is a democracy, we also have WordPress that's core ethos is democratizing publishing. And basically I have had for the past few weeks kind of it's a line from The Princess Bride, if any of you are familiar with this movie. Very. And basically it's been rattling in my head that you keep saying that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. And I just basically... What?
Is that from The Princess Bride?
The Princess Bride, yeah, because you keep saying inconceivable. Inconceivable. And everyone's walking around going, our democracy. And I'm like, And then I was thinking about WordPress in terms of our democracy. And it occurred to me that much like the United States of America, the democracy label or the democratizing publishing ethos is somewhat of a misnomer. In our country, even, you know, all politics aside, we've got the whole democracy idea. Everyone votes or can vote, or some people can vote. But then it turns over to the electors, and that's what actually happens. And that those votes can be overturned by, for example, the Supreme Court or whatnot, or they can be curtailed by. And really that kind of like sidestepping of democracy, where the theory is everyone gets one vote, one voice, was kind of striking me as stunningly similar to the WordPress world, including but not limited to the concept of a dictatorship. Just gonna throw that right out there. You know, because even though we have democratizing publishing as our ethos, we have a dictator for life. So there's definitely a bit of a benevolent dictator for life, Matt, for sure. But so we have this kind of competing thing happening that really struck me as similar to the United States. And it also occurred to me that there would be no other person better to discuss this with than Morten Rand Hendrickson down somewhere in this thing, because he's got a lot of thoughts on democracy, even though he's not from ye old United States of America. So I really wanted to invite you on here and talk about it with all of us yahoos. That's really what it is. I just want to say
you neglected to say American yahoos, but
American yahoos who have been entrenched in this experiment and, you know, subject to this experiment of democracy. So I just wanted to really talk about that, both for the United States, obviously, but less so and more about WordPress because, this is a WordPress show and not a totally political. It is. I mean, ideally, I just really like to talk about the US, but, we can talk about WordPress since it's more relevant. Anyway, I just wanted to discuss that. So what is everyone's thoughts on? Has anyone else been having this kind of nagging feeling? I mean, I know you've been having this nagging feeling for the past 5 years, Morten.
I was going to say, this predates our election in the U.S.
Yeah. It's just so high profile right now, this conversation. And I just thought we could bring it in and talk about it in terms of, this could be what happens when a democracy is not actually democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts?
So, have any of you watched that new TV show called Brave New World?
Yeah.
No.
Which world?
Yeah.
Brave New
Brave
World.
New World.
It's a reimagining
I read the book.
of Aldous Huxley's book.
I've read the book. Have not
I've read the
seen
book,
the
yeah.
reimagined show.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter if you read the book or watched the show. Either will do. So in this concept of Brave New World that Aldous Huxley mapped out in the 40s or 50s or something like that, he created this world in which the private sphere was something bad, right? Everyone knows what everyone else is doing, and being private or being with yourself only is by default a bad thing because it harms society. That idea stems from the term idiot, which goes back to idiota, which is the Greek term for a private person who chose not to be part of polis, right?
Oh,
Someone who
so they're an idiot.
someone who chooses to not take part in the democratic processes that govern their lives. So the term idiot.
Wow, I did not know that.
Wow,
Yeah,
I didn't
if you
either.
go far enough back in etymology, you'll find all this weird stuff, right? And in contrast to this, to the person who chooses not to, the problem with the person who chooses not to take part in polis or in public decision making arises from the fact that if you have a democracy, meaning you have a governance system that is designed so that the people rule, like democracy literally means, what is it? Demos and kratia, which is the people and rule, right? You get the situation where there is a people's rule, but the people choose not to partake. And then decisions are made only by the people who show up, which is a term we hear a lot in open source, right?
Yes, it is.
Are made by those who show up. This is
Wait, so that means them thinking we're idiots is actually linguistically sound.
yes, and
Not we, because I show up.
So
sometimes.
there's a line that goes from ancient Greek in Athens, where the idea of a democracy was built, to open source governance today. And the problems that occurred back then, right, around who gets to decide, how is the process made, how do you ensure that there are no undue influences in all this stuff, are persisting today in this sphere. The main difference is in the open source type mentality, we've done away with this idea of you have a populace who all have an equal say, and then they can choose whether they want to partake. Instead of taking only the meritocratic part of it and said, those who show up are the ones who get to decide. However, to show up and have decision power, you need to be of a certain level in terms of skill, in terms of social interactions, and you also need to sort of be tacitly approved by the powers that be, though the powers that be are not defined as a specific group. And then on top of this, you usually have a benevolent dictator for life, which is a contradiction in terms
Slight.
of astronomical proportions.
Slight. Just this big.
Who's
Just a little-
supposed to sit there and be sort of the balance, right? The balance of justice in the system.
He's like the vice president in the Senate, right?
Something
In
like
theory. That's how it's more portrayed, right? Cast a deciding vote. I don't know that that's
Yeah.
necessarily at all how it works, but that is definitely how it is portrayed in the lore.
Ideologically, the benevolent dictator for life. Sorry, I have trouble saying benevolent. Benevolent dictator for life is supposed to be the person who points in the direction the project should be going, and then everyone who wants to follow goes in line with this direction and follows the direction.
Kind of like the Pied Piper.
Yeah, it's very much like which, if you want to go down into the history of that, the Pied Piper actually stems from this the children crusades that happened in the Middle Ages, where people would actually convince kids to join the crusades and walk down to the Holy Lands to fight the war, and then all those kids got sold as slaves. But that's
wow, that got dark fast. Ooh, did not know that about the Pied Piper either.
All history is dark.
It got real dark.
All these terms that
dark right now
use all stem from something in history, and usually that is something really disturbing.
Yeah. It is.
So,
there's a lot of words like that. Don't start looking up etymologies, and you just won't be talking anymore. Maybe I should do that.
But I think in the context of WordPress, if you want to go down that path, the term democratized publishing refers specifically to what WordPress does to the people who use it, not to how WordPress operates.
What it does? It's good. No, but like what it allows them to do, as opposed to like what it does to them, drives them crazy.
No. Very much what it does to them.
Well,
it gives people, like, the idea is that WordPress would give people the capability of publishing, right?
Right, having that voice.
And take control over their web presence and put their voice onto the internet. Now, the interesting thing is, if you want to boil it down to just that basic fact, WordPress is basically just saying, I'm a web application, because all web applications do that, right? If you like democratized publishing with a watered down definition like that applies to everything. Facebook, Twitter.
I was going to say Facebook.
That we're talking on right now. Like,
don't give Zuckerberg any ideas.
So it's not. The definition of democratizing publishing in the WordPress context is not defined beyond the term itself. I mean, I asked Matt about this at a WordCamp ages ago. The answer was basically just means what it says, which is what I just said. You're just defining what the web is. So it's problematic in that it's so poorly defined. But the core idea of giving people the capabilities and agency to publish their own content online and have control over it is a solid one if it was only actually applied in the policies and practices of the project itself, right? Because if you want to say a project, doesn't have to be WordPress, it can be anything. If someone says, hey, our
Raccoon.js.
Publishing. Sorry, I didn't even hear what you said.
I said Raccoon.js.
Yes. So if you have a project and you say, our goal is to democratize publishing, then you have to go one step back and say, what are the necessary conditions for democratizing publishing, right? And we define here democratizing publishing as every single person on the web who has access to the web and the technology means necessary to use it should be able to publish content on the web. What are the necessary conditions for that to work? Well, that is things like access to inexpensive, stable broadband internet for everyone. That is access to an internet that is not being censored by ISPs or governments, so that people's voices are censored before they even reach the platform. It also means that the people that use it cannot be subjected to any type of onerous activity on behalf of other entities in terms of preventing them from saying certain things. But within that realm, we also have this idea that free speech, as defined as like you can express your opinion, does not also allow you to express opinions that directly infringe on other rights from other people. Meaning, even though you can say what you want to say, there are certain limits to what you can say because speech acts can actually influence other people. So if you say something that in saying that oppresses the rights of another person, your free speech rights do not supersede their right to freedom and liberty and security of person, for instance, right? It's part of a larger context. Now, all of this, all I just said, are necessary conditions for democratizing publishing.
Right.
And the only way that you can say justifiably that you are standing for democratizing publishing is if you also defend these things. and promote these things to the people who make decisions. Those would be governments, those would be multinational corporations, those would be the actual decision makers that govern the web and the internet. And for
So
that
advocacy.
place, you then go into who makes that, like who puts those people in power? Well, that's the electorate, right? So all of this stuff sticks together in this huge loop of participation, power, struggles, and then what is it? Shoshana Zuboff says, who knows, who decides, and who decides who decides.
Well, that's just the questions about WordPress I keep asking. Who knows who decides and who knows who decides? If we could answer those questions, there would be a lot. Everyone's like, oh, we know who decides, and we know who knows who decides. Anyway, I have a point about all of that because, well, 2 points. One point is I think that the point that you made about the advocacy concept, that democratizing publishing really would be advocating for access to the ability to publish, as opposed to just the ability to publish with all those barriers. So that's really, I think you're really right. I totally agree with you in terms of that's really what that means, democratizing publishing, making it available to everybody. But I also think there is oftentimes in WordPress and maybe possibly in actual like working government democracies, this difference between a voice and a vote. Mm-hmm. Because having a voice is one thing, but having a vote is a whole other thing, right? Like, so in WordPress, theoretically, the voice that you're given from your website, or even the voice that you're given on the Make channel, that you could just, make one up and have, that is not the same thing as a vote. And I think that is really interesting also in terms of, for example, the United States democracy, because we're all obsessed with free speech, which is great. And everyone's like, I have my opinion and whatever. But like, in theory, in our world, you still only get one vote. That's ignoring the Electoral College and all of that drama and what that means. But which totally negates the whole idea of one vote. But in WordPress, the vote and the voice are very different, because even if you have a voice in the ecosystem or in the meritocracy, you don't necessarily get a vote. There are no votes. Yeah. There are not votes made. There are decisions made at meetings sometimes somewhere. But it also kind of brings in a little bit of the element of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is a super nerdy reference I'm going to make when the Vogons come and they're like, what? You didn't see the paperwork that was filed on Alpha Centauri? It's been there for 40 years. You should have complained then. And that is what I feel like we often do with WordPress, is that we're often like, well, we talked about it in the Make channel at 3 a.m. Pacific time for 4 days. So you really should have been paying attention. And it was on one blog post, in like 2 lines, where we decided that we, unless someone brings those things up, like recently it was brought up and covered by some of the media, the WordPress media, about the whole PHP thing. That would have just, that PHP ticket about being for PHP 8, making things good for PHP 8, would have just kind of like disappeared into the ethos unless someone like kind of made a fuss about it. And so I think that is that there is no democracy within the WordPress organization at all. Mm-hmm. So that whole concept of democratizing publishing really because there's no vote, there's no rule, there's no people rule at all. And so I feel like the split is that the tool, and using your argument that there's no advocacy there, I would probably agree that it's not even applicable to the tool, that it is democratizing publishing, let alone the organization. But can the tool democratize publishing at all if the organization doesn't even follow those same ethos?
No.
Like, is that even possible?
So
inconceivable.
To raise
my own callback. I did my own callback.
To raise a quick point on, it's in the Make blogs, it's in Slack. Telling somebody to follow the Make blogs, to follow Slack for an issue that they're interested in, is like telling someone who's interested in U.S. politics to figure out U.S. politics by watching C-SPAN. It'll be on eventually. The issue will be raised eventually. and
Right.
or they'll cover whatever Senate or congressional hearing, and you just have to kind of hope to catch it.
And you'll
But
see it,
you
but you
also have
can't
to-
do anything about it. You can just watch it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you also have to, you have to wade through the noise.
exactly.
Right.
So when do we get our like rock the vote moment here? Like, how do we like learn to register to vote, and then figure out how to vote, and then go and vote?
There is no
there's
vote.
There's
That's
no
my
mechanism
point.
for that. It's not even pretending to be that. That's the
You can
thing,
even
right?
you can even put a flag on your car, Jason, and it's not. There's still no vote.
This
That's how it works. I think that's how it works here in the U.S. You just put a flag on your car, and then
See, like,
Well, to a certain degree, it kind of feels like these are those similarities that have been really bopping around in my head. Like the difference between the people rule or the people's vote versus the people just talking a bunch of smack.
Mhm.
Like, and that is really what's happening here. There's like all this noise, like you were saying, Steve, and it's like in the U.S., it's like, does your vote even matter? People who vote on the Republican ticket in California are totally disenfranchised. People who try to vote blue better in Texas this time, or better being subjective
say
there.
Alabama.
Different
Alabama.
in Texas this year. But yeah, say Alabama or, Arkansas, like if you happen to be more liberal, then you feel totally disenfranchised. So I feel like that disenfranchisement is really similar to that disenfranchisement that we feel within the WordPress community. And I'm wondering, is this a problem with democracy itself, or is it that democracy doesn't exist
well,
in both WordPress and in the governments in the
so
world? I don't know.
democracy is the best of the worst governance models, right? It's just you have a
Best
bunch
of the worst.
terrible governance models, and the best one we've come up with of the terrible ones is democracy.
Yeah, but democracy being a theoretical model, because we're not actually doing that here,
No.
right? And
but that's kind of
we're
my
not
point.
doing that in WordPress.
Every time you approach an open source project and you say, hey, we need some sort of democracy here, the pushback from the people in power will always be, look at how democracy doesn't work, right? I mean, you're all in California, right? California is a prime example of this, where there's an absolute democracy factor to that. If you just get enough signatures, you can put anything on a ballot, and then people vote for all those things, right?
It's
And then
deathly frightening,
is thinking
actually.
going, if you vote for this thing, which costs $100 billion, then you have to take $100 billion off something else, right? So someone told me once that like the California budget is in like permanent deficit, not because any of the money is actually spent, but because theoretically it should be being spent on things that there isn't money for. So there's all these things that people vote for that never happen because there's no money. And then when
Bullet
it doesn't
train.
happen, they get angry with the politicians for not doing it. And the politicians are sitting there going like, I have $100. You're asking me to do something that costs $10,000. How on earth am I supposed to do this, right?
We had a gubernatorial race that had this exact same issue, where we had literally anyone and everyone that was running for governor all at the same time.
And
Isn't that the one Arnold Schwarzenegger won?
I was just gonna say, is that when Arnold?
I mean,
It was the recall election.
Yeah,
but
fun
like-
fact, he signed my diploma. So my college diploma is signed by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold.
So it really feels like it has been completely a waste. It was a complete waste of my 4 years and my money, just for the record. Just need to put that out.
Back in Iceland
Back in Iceland.
so back in Iceland in like year 1100 or something like that, they introduced this thing called a ting, which is where a representative from each group would go into a central location, and then they would make decisions on behalf of their populace, right? So each little townlet or whatever would select one person to represent their interest and go and then make decisions with everyone else. That's representative democracy.
So we are basically at the same level as Iceland in 1000.
No, their system actually worked because each group would get
That works. Cool. Good
each
times.
group would be like 40 people, right? Or like 40 households. And they would have very similar interests because they were isolated in some fjord in Iceland, right? And they're like, this glacier is coming. We need to move over there. Can we get help? Everyone had the same concerns within that little community. So the person they sent would represent that community very well. when you look at a country like Canada or like the United States, which is very, very large, and you have like one central government that tries to do things for people that live in different financial, social, and even climate zones, and
Right.
try to apply one solution to everything, it just doesn't work. And
I mean, that in
WordPress,
theory is supposed to be the state's concept, right? Like the
Yeah.
states rule, then
like,
right, yeah.
America is 50 countries pretending to be one country. Canada is 11 countries pretending to be one country. Europe
We're also a
is,
little schizophrenic. Just so
Europe
you know.
is a bunch of countries pretending to be America, right? It's just stupid. It's like it doesn't work that way. So, but like if you want to
just a
solve
bunch-
this whole problem with WordPress and democracy, you need to go back and look at the original ideas of what open source ideology is, because those ideas were written by like socialist libertarian crazy people who thought that if you just make enough open source software, corporate control over open source will simply collapse and nothing will cost money anymore. Like you read the original GNU manifesto, it's a political manifesto of we just put open source into the world, we will destroy corporate power. Right?
Good
That's
job.
basically what it is.
They
No,
did
it's
it. Oh no, wait.
It is
No.
completely detached from reality because it says things like, when you need something to be done, someone will just do it effectively out of the goodness of their heart. The reality, though, is if you read the GNU manifesto and you read the Cathedral and the Bazaar, they both have this underlying premise that if we just do this, corporate power will disappear. What has actually happened is corporate power is the only thing that contributes to open source for the things that people don't want to do, right? So whenever there's a
Right.
security issue or some major problem, the only people who are willing to pay anyone to do any work are the corporations, and they're just then infringing and taking control over everything, right? And then
And
in
the only
addition, you
people
have
willing
these-
to do it are getting paid. Whether you
Yes,
know what I mean? Like
but-
they're not willing to do it out of the
but
goodness
then
of
they
their
come
heart.
in
at a
with an
certain point.
agenda, right? And then you have, in
Right.
addition to that, the people who started these projects also then say, hey, I want to make money from this. So they start cathedrals that look like bazaars. And then they say, hey, you know,
.com.
all of this is the same thing, but it's actually not. But you won't be able to tell the difference. And whenever the bazaar does something good, we'll just incorporate it into the cathedral. But when the cathedral does something good, we'll keep it in here because that earns us money, right? And that's where the power problem is. And that's when like Michael Sandel published a book this year about meritocracy. And he says, meritocracy is the tendency of winners to inhale too deeply of their own success. That is the definition of open source.
Wow.
It's the people who sit at the top and go like, I got here because I am the best at this and therefore I should make all the decisions, not realizing that you got there because millions of other people didn't have the time, money, and privilege to be able to contribute, and you gave them no way of doing it because you have no funding system, you have no support system. You just sit there and say, hey, I'm successful. Why aren't you successful? It must be your own fault. Right?
Or they those people actually do give their time and their energy, and because those other people can just be there longer because they're paid to be there, they collect all of that bounty and claim it as what they did. They're like, well, I've been here for a year doing this, and these people have only been here for 3 months, and they may have helped a little, but it's us. And
So
then
I
claiming it and putting it on
We
their
have
pages.
1 minute left. If you want to see a model that kind of works differently and it kind of has an indication of maybe being the right way to go,
Is it
look
is
at
it the Hunger Games? It's the Hunger Games.
Yes. So look at the OpenJS Foundation. Because the OpenJS Foundation, they've created a system so that things that are considered infrastructure actually gets funded, right? And decisions are not made by the contributors randomly by just pushing for things. There's actually oversight committees in the hierarchical structure that says, are these things worth investing in? Is this a direction we want to go? So they're basically taking responsibility. That's what a project like WordPress should have. It shouldn't have a full-on democracy, but it should have some form of structure that ensures that decisions that are made for the right reasons and that there's transparency in that decision-making process. But as long as the people who sit on the top either say, I'm not interested in having this conversation, or even worse, say, I don't have any power, then we're not going to get anywhere, right?
That never gets said. You know, I got to tell you, I would be happy with the electoral college version of democracy in WordPress. We don't even have that. Like, can we just get to that level and then we'll move? to the next one. I think we should do
Just make
Steven's
su-
topic next week
yeah,
and refine
absolutely.
the topic further because I'm down with refining this topic.
Always run away from the cornucopia, not toward the cornucopia.
Don't get it.
It's the Hunger Games.
Hunger
Never mind.
Games!
Oh, I've never
Put
seen
all
it.
the food in the middle. Let all the people run through it. It's
Yeah,
actually
you do not. Yeah, you got to go out to the woods. Out to the woods. You're only going to survive if you go out to the woods.
All right.
Don't go for
Well,
the
on
weapons.
that note,
All right.
this was
Yep,
super
on-
fun. I love talking about this stuff because I am a political geek. But I would love to talk about what Steven was
Yeah.
talking about and refining this topic. I think this is something that's really
not
interesting.
me. Not me. Stephen Carnum, somebody way smarter than me.
Yeah, not Zeke.
No.
I'm talking about him. Anyway, yeah. Thank you for talking about this, by the way, with us
Yeah,
and bringing Latin etymology into it.
I loved it.
That's what Wikipedia is for.
Exactly. All right, folks. Thank you very much. Here's our outro. Go support us over on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/WP We'd love it if you were to help us out over there. There's the fine folks that are helping us out over there. Thank you very much.
Hey.
Hit the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified. We'd appreciate that. And if you'd like to listen to us as a podcast, you can do so as well. Go over to WPWaterCooler.com/subscribe to learn how to subscribe to this podcast on any of the podcasting networks that are over there. Thank you all very much. You have a good rest of your day. Enjoy your Friday or whatever day it is that you're watching this. Talk to y'all later.